Hi, my name is Nick Russo, Senior Service Provider Solution Architect with Trend Micro, working closely with our service provider partners and their journey in Trend Vision One. As part of new features being introduced to Vision One for service providers, administrators can now create endpoint policy templates, which can then be applied to downstream Trend Vision One tenants for end customers. In part 1 of this video, we'll review how to create policy resources like anti-malware exclusions and firewall rules, and defining policy protection settings. In part 2, we'll continue by configuring the cyber risk and security operation features and management settings. Then we'll step through creating an endpoint policy template, applying endpoint policy templates to tenants, and assigning policies once a template has been created. Before creating an endpoint policy, it's ideal to create the associated resources for that policy to customize various modules of the endpoint policy. We'll navigate to templates, then endpoint policy resources. In the list of items on the left, we'll start with application control rules. By clicking Add Application Control Rule, I can define applications that should be allowed or blocked based on 3 different criteria: certificate, file path, or a SHA-256 value. Depending on how you want to define the application, you may have additional parameters for defining the app. Next, we have firewall rules where we can define action to be taken based on criteria defined in the rule. I'll give the rule a name, then define the action to be taken: allow, deny, or allow and log. Next, I'll define a priority for a rule, then the direction for which the traffic is generated from. I'll select a protocol from the list, then I'll specify packet source and destination information. For the IP option, we can also define IP lists within the endpoint policy resources, or I can choose any, along with a port list that can also be defined as a policy resource. In the list section, I'll start with defining resources attached to anti-malware for directories, file extensions, or specific files. With directory lists, I can define file paths that can then be applied as an anti-malware exclusion in that module. The same applies to file extension and file lists. IP and port lists were referenced earlier when creating firewall rules and can also apply to the intrusion prevention module. We can define trusted IP addresses such as internal hosts to exclude from intrusion prevention monitoring. When creating firewall rules, we can define the source or destination IP addresses for the firewall rules to monitor. Next is program lists, which can be used in 2 ways: for excluding inspection from the security agent and for allowing bypass of the firewall module. I'll give the list a name, and then for each OS I'll provide the full program path to the process to be added to the list, and multiple paths can be added by clicking the Add button. The last list available to create is a web list, which is used by the web reputation module. We can define URLs or domains to be referenced by that module to be blocked or allowed. The final resource available to be created is a schedule, which can be referenced later when configuring the anti-malware module and scheduled scans. I'll choose a start date, frequency, and start time. There's also a timeout option, so if a machine is offline and doesn't check in within the timeout period defined, the scan will be skipped. Now that we have resources defined, we can create an endpoint policy to specify which security modules should be enabled for downstream protected systems and any customization that should be applied. I'll navigate to Endpoint Policy Settings in the left menu under Templates, and then I'll click Create Policy. I'll give the policy a name, and in the list of modules, I'll define which features should be turned on by selecting Enable in the drop-down menu, then click Create. After creating the policy, I can now customize each module accordingly by clicking on the policy in the list. It's important to note that you must click Save at the bottom of each page when customizing the policy. For anti-malware, I can set a detection and prevention monitoring level. In most cases, these can be left at the default moderate setting. Next are the scan settings to enable real-time scan and to set a schedule for the anti-malware module. Below the schedule, we can also apply any directory, extension, or file lists that were defined in the resources section. The next module is web reputation to protect users from accessing malicious URLs. We'll set a security level here. Medium is normally appropriate and can be adjusted to high or low where necessary. We have an option to block pages that have not yet been tested by Trend Micro, and below that, we can assign web list rules that we created in the resources section to allow or block. For intrusion prevention, there are various configuration options to define depending on the type of systems we're protecting. First, we'll define if the module should run in detect-only mode, where we will alert when vulnerabilities protected against by rules defined are triggered, but allowing the traffic to pass through to the system. In the recommendation settings section, we'll specify how intrusion prevention rules are applied to systems. By selecting Use Recommendation Scan to dynamically apply rules to each endpoint, a Vision One Endpoint Pro license will be allocated to the systems with this setting, and it's primarily recommended for critical workloads or servers. We can dynamically apply IPS rules based on information we receive from our recommendation scan, which include rules that can protect against vulnerable server-based apps or server operating system vulnerabilities. If we select Apply Intrusion Prevention Core rule set, then our primary IPS rules will be applied to systems with this policy assigned. The third option, Apply Intrusion Prevention Rules you've configured to Always status, allows an administrator to granularly define which rules should be applied to systems with this policy. Under Rule Status and Configuration, we have additional options to adjust individual intrusion prevention rules where necessary. In the IP address exclusion section, we can assign IP lists that were defined in our resources earlier in the video. With application control, the endpoint agent can monitor for software changes and allow or block software actions. When enabling lockdown mode, application control will only allow previously installed applications on the endpoint to run, and it blocks all others. Before enabling this feature, it would be recommended to properly define application control rules to ensure there are no interruptions in operations. In the Rules section, we can assign rules that we previously defined in Resources. In the Status dropdown, select All, then enable the appropriate rules. When working with device control, we can specify the level of access that USB storage or mobile devices have when connecting these peripherals to a protected system. If I want to allow a specific type of device, I can define the device in the Allowed Devices section with the vendor, model, and serial number of the device. I'll now step through the firewall configuration to wrap up the available protection options in the endpoint policy setup. Firewall has 3 scan setting levels, low, medium, and high. With low, all inbound and outbound traffic is allowed. Medium will block all inbound traffic and allow outbound traffic. And the high setting will block all inbound and outbound traffic and will rely solely upon the firewall rules that are defined. In the Rule Management section, we will assign the rules that were previously created in the Resource section of this video. That wraps up Part 1 of the Endpoint Policy Template feature. Make sure to watch Part 2 of this video to learn about additional features when creating policies, as well as how to apply templates to downstream tenants and then apply those policies to the appropriate systems. If you have any questions related to the content of this video, or perhaps would like guidance related to policy creation and best practices, please let us know. Reach out to your account manager and we'll set up some time to work together. Thanks for watching this video, and we look forward to working with you on your journey in Trend Vision One.